So it was that a Martian cylinder was found. Cold, unstirring, buried deep in rubble of the Welsh mountain it had crashed into. Ogilvy, the astronomer, was summoned, commanded to find out everything about this particular cylinder, as so different it was to all other Martian projectiles that had invaded our planet. It had remained silent, unmoving, entombed deep in a layer of dust and rock, with its primary screw cap still in place. Chapter 1, 1913. The terror of the coming of the Martians was all but a distant memory, a bad dream that had faded with time. Amid the tinkling of the teacups and the boiling of the kettle, I sat contented as I finished my breakfast with Laura. Unfolding the Daily Chronicle, I read and realized to my horror the discovery of a Martian cylinder. It had been found complete, intact and as yet unopened, in a remote region of Wales and carefully transported to London. I thought then of my wife's fortunate escape from the town of Leatherhead, just before a lone Martian fighting machine descended upon it with a heat ray. My stomach began to churn and to knot with a sickly unease, and I knew for certain that my breakfast was over. The very thought that I could encounter a living Martian again was awful, the worst possible news I could ever imagine. This would herald nothing but chaos, tremendous hardship, and the likelihood of death. I glanced at Laura momentarily. She silently sipped her tea from across the table, still gently waking up, it seemed, blissfully unaware of any renewed Martian threat, just as I had been only precious moments before. The very idea that my wife, sitting here with me now, so safe, cozy in her dressing gown, could shortly be struggling again for her own survival against the elements and Martian monsters was unthinkable. And yet, less than 30 miles away, hostile Martians, still very much alive, could be lurking in the newly found projectile. 10 years or so since their arrival on this planet. I could not comprehend why Ogilvy had brought the Martian projectile back with him and so recklessly placed it on the outskirts of London in his exhibition. It made no sense. Surely it would have been far safer and less of a risk to have examined the projectile where it was found in the sparse wilderness of Wales. I knew then I had to go to London, to Crystal Palace, to find out more and to be there when they opened up the alien cylinder. Chapter 2, Train Journey. My first concern was much more personal to me, Laura. The Martian invasion was solely responsible for the death of all her family, and it was a subject we rarely spoke of. The thought of her being here in this house alone, combined with a new Martian threat, proved too much for me. I asked Laura if she would like to go with me to Crystal Palace, and after a lot of gentle persuasion, she went upstairs to change. While she busied herself getting ready, I managed to read the front page entirely. I felt no better as I folded the headline, "Is this the end of the world?" out of sight and carefully hid the newspaper away. Making our way to the station, Laura said that before the end of the day, she wanted to know what was bothering me. On the platform, I stood directly in front of the newspaper stand, blocking and shielding my wife from countless headlines of doom and the end of the world, hoping upon hope that she would not see any of it. Hearing the whistle of the approaching locomotive, I held her close as the 10:05 to Clapham Junction pulled in. After boarding the train, the door slammed shut, the guard's whistle blew, and I wondered then if I was doing the right thing. Train jutted and began to move. Any sense of self-preservation or deep-held concern was crushed as my stubborn curiosity got the better of me. I had to know what was happening in order to prepare for the worst, and should the worst happen, I knew I had no plan. The journey itself was unremarkable. The engine chugged along happily, occasionally blowing its whistle as rhythmically the carriages clanked, rocked and rattled over rails, points and under bridges. The frequent stopping at the stations along the line became a blur. Passengers got on and off, and I found myself trying to be normal, smiling, nodding, being polite, but completely lost in my own world. I had no plausible answers, just the frustration of many thoughts and questions. As the train puffed closer to London, the more my apprehension grew. The scars of the Martian invasion could still be seen in almost every direction I looked. We began to slow to a gentle stop momentarily at a junction. I noticed a cluster of gaunt houses, mere burnt-out shells of brick and stone. I pondered where the families of all those ruined homes could be, and if any survived. The train began to move again, edging slowly forwards. I wondered then what the Martians inside the cylinder were up to at this particular moment. Perhaps the projectile was a Trojan horse, its only purpose a sudden and surprise attack. My hope for any sort of answer was Ogilvy. He must have had a good reason to bring the Martian projectile here to London, but I could not think of any. The train, it seemed, was in no particular rush, choosing today to be extra slow and unhurried. I grumbled, but Laura, wonderful Laura, not knowing the truth behind our destination or its importance, simply smiled, entertained by my lack of patience. At last we arrived at Clapham Junction, and keeping pace with other passengers, Laura and I walked along the platform under the warm, dappled light of summer that was streaming through the glass in the roof of the station. An express train came rattling through at another platform, noisily and quickly. The urgency at which it passed was soon forgotten. Amid the slamming of carriage doors, the whistles of guards and trains, all suddenly hissed into silence by the sudden release of steam and pressure in this cathedral of the locomotive. The heavy puffing and pulling away of a noisy goods train out of the station now drew my attention, and as the last of the wagons disappeared from view, I became aware that my wife was no longer beside me. Someone else, a smaller woman, a stranger, had taken her place. I looked behind. Laura had picked up a discarded newspaper. Her happy, carefree mood had changed to one of panic as she fearfully read the headlines, and all I could do was watch helplessly as I hurried back to her.